Good morning, Rabbi Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Kafchet Amud Bet, some 12 lines down by basically 2 dots. Amar Mor, today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shlema for Michael ben Nahid, that should have Refuah Shlema, for Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, that should have full recovery, Refuah Shlema Be'ezrat Hashem, Amen. And this week's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Shea family, Dayan family, and Cohen families. It should be an ultimate zchut for all the mishpachot Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. So we are at the very tail end of the previous Mishnah that discussed the halachot of a katan being patur from Sukkah, and the Gemara said in the discussion of how you understand the words of the pasuk, stating that Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshevu b'Sukkot. The Gemara darshaned Ezrach ha'ezrach, and then Kol ha'ezrach l'rabot et ha'ktanim. That even the ktanim, even the minors, would have to sit in the sukkah. Now, the problem that we brought up as we learned these words of the Mishnah, the Gemara, was that our Mishnah, just few lines before that, said that Katan is patur from the Sukkah. Right? The Mishnah said, Nashim v'avadim uktanim pturim min Sukkah. And yet the Gemara says, Kol ha'ezrach, the Kol is coming to add that the Katan is indeed chayav besukkah. So says the Gemara, Amar Mor, Kol rabot et aktanim. How can that be? We learned that the minors are indeed patur from the sukkah. And what answers, lo kasha. It's not shver, it's not a question. Kan bekatan shigia lechinuch, kan bekatan shlo igia lechinuch. It really depends if the katan is the age that you have to start training them in the mitzvot, then you are obligated. Minor that is younger than that hasn't reached the age of chinuch, then it's patur. You don't have to bring them in the sukkah. Now, of course, this begs the question, the time old question of what exactly is mitzvah chinuch. Is it doraita? Is it rabbanan? Is it on the father? Is it on the child? But however you slice that, it's going to be an obligation midrabanan for the katan to dwell in the sukkah, and a younger minor that is not age of chinuch will be absolved. Now, age of chinuch by itself is a questionable item. It starts somewhere between, depending on how sharp the kid is and how much he understands, will start somewhere as early as 5, 6, and as late as 8, 9 years of age, depending on the kids. It says the Gemara, Kan bekatan shigia lechinuch, kan bekatan shlo igia lechinuch. Now the Gemara says, wait a second, Katan shigia lechinuch midrabananhu. We just said that this is a mitzvah of chinuch, which the Gemara now says is midrabanan. In other words, even if you midoraita have to, you're obligated to do chinuch, but the fact that he's going to sit in the sukkah at that age will be the Rabbanan. Says the Gemara, how can you have a pasuk in the Torah that indicates that a katan should be sitting in the sukkah, which is Kol ha'ezrach is coming to add the ketanim? I thought that's midrabanan. You can't have a pasuk for that, because that will make it doraita. But says you're correct. Really, it's midrabanan. V'kra asmachta ba'almahu. It's just an asmachta. Now, when you have asmachtas, the Maral of Prague writes in the beginning of his sefer, he wrote an entire sefer on answering Be'er Hagolah, and answering different questions that people have on Gemara and Chazals, and he discusses as one of the items that he has, how do you have addition of the Rabbanan? It's the very beginning of the Be'er Hagolah, and he explains that even when we say asmachta, it's not that Chazal found something cute to say from the pasuk. You have an inherent connection with the pasuk and that item that they're adding. So you could see here over here, Kol HaEzrach is coming to add something, right? And therefore, we had, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the drasha before, daf and a half ago, that it's coming to add a katan that became a gadol in Chol HaMoed, on Chol HaMoed. You remember that? Rabbi Eliezer darshins that you need to have 7 days of Sukkah that you celebrate. You can't change Sukkah in the middle of the Chag. You can't build a Sukkah in the middle of Chol HaMoed because it's not a 7-day Sukkah. It's just a 5-day Sukkah. It's a 4-day Sukkah. And yet, said Rabbi Eliezer, well, if a Katan becomes a Bar Mitzvah in the middle of Sukkot, even though that he doesn't have a 7-day Chag, still will be Chayav. Where do you see that? Kol HaEzrach B'Yisrael, right? So you see inherently the katan is attached. So even though the Chazal over here are saying that this is an asmachta, it's a midrabanan, but as the Maral explains, again, he doesn't say it by here, but in general, in Shas, the drasha that is used as asmachta even, it is inherently connected with that concept, seeing over here that the word kol is inherently connected with ktanim, and Chag HaSukkot, so here is the rabot et ktanim. So says the...
So it's referring to the son, or the son, not the father.
Well, yes, it may be your obligation to see to it that he's sitting in the sukkah. That gets into the machloket rishonim of whether or not chinuch is the chiyuv on the father or is on the child. So says the Gemara, Katan sheino sarich leimo. The last part of our Mishnah, previous Mishnah, was that a child that no longer needs his mother, chayav besukah. And then we had the story of the grandson of Shammai, which is a different thing. So we're going to discuss those two things now. A katan that doesn't need his mother, what age is that? So says the Gemara, hechi dami. What is the definition of a minor that no longer needs the mother? So says the Gemara, Amri deber Rabbi Yanai, in the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Yanai, they taught, Kol shenifne ve'en imo mekanachato. He's old enough to do his needs himself. He goes to the bathroom. He doesn't need his mother's help to wipe himself, to clean himself, and to be ready. That is a katan that no longer needs the mother. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Resh Lakish Omer, Kol sheneor mishnato ve'eno kore ima. We're talking about a kid that wakes up in the middle of the night and does not call his mother. So the Gemara says, wait a second, Gdolim nami karu le'ima. Even the older ones, the ones who really don't need the mother, still wake up in the middle of the night and call their mother. Does that mean that they need the mother? It's an emotional thing. Sometimes you have a bad dream and then you wake up, you need your mother. So says the Gemara, no. Kol shneor ve'eno kore ima. We're talking about a kid that panics and calls the mother until the mother has to come to his bed. Not, that's like a showcase that he still needs the mother very much, and it's putting him in the sukkah, and he wakes up in the middle of the night and can't operate on his own, and he needs the mother to be rushing to his side. That is already a katan that needs the mother, but not a kid that gets up in the middle of the night and says Ima, and if the mother's not there, goes back to sleep. That is not necessarily young, too young. It could be that he already has grown out of being sarich limo. Says the Gemara, Ma'asevi al kalato, that the grandson of Shammai Hazaken himself was born. Ma'aseh l'histori. Gemara says, wait a second. It doesn't make any sense that you bring this Ma'aseh at the end of the Mishnah, because listen to how the Mishnah is set up. The Mishnah says, a katan does not need to sit in the sukkah. Doesn't. And a katan that doesn't need the mother needs to sit in the sukkah, which is a few years of age. And then the Gemara says, story. Shammai's daughter gave birth to a infant baby, and Shammai went on to destroy the ceiling of the room and make a sukkah out of it. Well, this infant, certainly according to the Mishnah, does not need to see the sukkah. So why are you bringing a story that contradicts the point, the very point of the Mishnah? The point of the Mishnah is a katan that tzarich leimo is patur from sukkah. And then you say, oh, Shammai did this amazing thing. Doesn't make sense. The Gemara says, yes, correct. Chasur michsar b'achi katani. There's a piece missing that the Mishnah is assuming that you understand, and that is the Shammai machmir. The Chachamim of the Mishnah hold that katan is patur from the sukkah. Shammai was machmir. Now, this is a ground for a lot of literature of what exactly was the chumrah. Is it mikar adin? Is it a chumrah? But Shammai held that even a katan, an infant, a katan ben yomo, would sit in the sukkah. And therefore, when his grandson was born, he went to make sure that the room is turned into a sukkah, that his daughter with a baby crib there are actually in the sukkah for the need of this little baby boy that was born. Fine. So says the Mishnah. Kol Shiva, this is the last Mishnah that we're going to have about dwelling in the sukkah. That's it, basically. This is the last Mishnah of the Perek. And after this, we're going to be discussing all the halachot of Arba Minim, Lulav, and Etrog, and Hadas, and Arava. That's what's going to be the real focus in the next prakim of our Masechet. So this is really the last piece that we're going to be discussing, the halachot of Sukkah and dwelling in the Sukkah. Kol Shiv'at HaYamim, Adam Oseh Sukkato Keva Ubeto Arai. The entire 7 days of Sukkot, a person makes his main primary dwelling and living in the Sukkah, and his house becomes a temporary dwelling. You need some sefer, you want to go to the farm shelf and take it from the house. You could do that. You're barely, rarely at home, and you are mainly and primarily living in the sukkah. So says the Mishnah, Yardu Geshamim, how about rain? If it starts raining, Me'matay mutar lefanot, when are you allowed to empty the sukkah? Now, there are those who say empty meaning empty the vessels, but simply understood means when can you get out of the sukkah? Because we mentioned that mista'er is patur mi'as sukkah. When you are in pain in the sukkah, you're patur. You don't have to stay there. And the Yerushalmi says, Kol ha-patur midavar ve'oseu nikra hediot. If you're patur from something, and yet you insist on doing it, you're called a hediot, you're amaretz, right? So there's a time that if you have to go in, you go in. So, says that's the normal understanding of it. Again, there are those who discuss how about missing out on the first night of Chag Sukkot, eating a kazai, the kabetza, in the sukkah, which is an obligation from the Torah. So maybe that is different, even if the rain comes. Maybe you should go in and then come back out, and so on, which is going to be discussed also in our Mishnah. So says the Mishnah, Tisrach HaMikveh, when there's enough dripping from the rain that's coming, that your sensitive food that has to be a certain consistency, and the water that drips in it ruins it. Once that will be affected, you already could pack in and go out of the sukkah into your house. Mashlu mashal lema davar dome. Now the Mishnah says, once we speak about rain, the rain by itself is not a good sign in Chag Sukkot. It's not a good sign, right? We had actually the Mishnah in the beginning of Masechet Daf Bet, for those who still remember, that Rabbi Yeshua, they discuss when do you start saying Mashiv Aruach Morid Geshem, right? And he wanted to say, well, let's start saying it from the beginning of Chag Sukkot. How can you say that? It's Siman Kelala. I said, no, I'm not saying that you should ask for it. That would be in Barech Aleinu. But 10 Talmata Livracha, you're asking for rain. But Mashiv Aruch Morid Geshem, you're just mentioning it is Hazkarat HaGeshamim, right? Maskirin Gevurot Geshamim. And so I said, so if you do that, why do you even say it? And then back and forth between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua there in Masechet Ta'anit, and you see that there the Gemara calls it Siman Klala, right? Rain in Chag HaSukkot is Siman Klala. Why is it Siman Klala? By the way, this becomes a massive platform for discussion around a Lashon Rambam. Rambam says in the beginning of Chag HaSukkot is Siman Klala. Where do you get that? Right, the Mishnah there in Ta'anit does not discuss beginning of Chag HaSukkot versus you start saying Mashiva Ruach Marta Geshem after the first Yom Tov. So it's mashma from the Gemara that the entire Chag HaSukkot is Siman Kelala to have any rain. Where do you see that? Here in the Mishnah in Masechet Sukkah, Daf Kafchet Amud Bet. The Gemara says, the Mishnah says, you know what the example for this is when it rains? Lema davar domeh le'evet shba limzok kos lerabo. A servant that comes to give a cup of wine to his master, and the master, instead of taking it and enjoying it and using the service that's provided for him, he takes the cup and spills it on the face of the servant, which means, I don't want you to serve me. Get out of here. And here's the same thing. You're setting up a situation in which you're going to be serving Hashem by coming to his sukkah, coming to Sila de Mehemluta to serve Hashem, and Hashem is kicking you out by raining upon you, making it uncomfortable, saying, get out, I don't want you. Now, there are a number of Achronim who say that this is not necessarily applicable in places in the world that rain is extremely expected in this season. Talking about somewhere like Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is not a season of rain yet. It's not, if it rains, it's something unusual, so that's a sign. But if you live in places in the world that every 20 minutes you have rain, so that's not necessarily a Siman Klala, and it's the normal day-to-day life in those areas. But obviously, the Mishnah gives this parable, this mashal, of understanding what is considered siman bracha or siman klala. Le'evet shebalim zokos lerabo v'shafach lo kiton al panav. He throws the entire thing on his face, indicating that I don't want your service. The Gemara is going to discuss who pours it on who. Is it that you're coming to serve the master takes it and pours it on you, or is you disgracing the master, you're coming to give it to him, and by mistake you pour it on his head instead of giving it to him? That's what the Gemara is going to discuss. So says the Gemara, the entire 7 days of Sukkot, you have to make your main dwelling inside the Sukkah, and your house is going to be temporary. How is that? How you look kelim na'im? How do you mekayem this mitzvah? You have beautiful vessels. You bring all the beautiful silver, gold, fancy items that you have in the sukkah. That's where you're going to be using them. Ochel v'shoteh u'mtayel b'sukkah. You eat, you drink, you even hang out. You want to hang out and play a game of chess. Sometimes it's not disgraceful. It's not something bad. You do it in the sukkah. You want to schmooze, you schmooze in the sukkah. How do we know that? The Torah Rabbanan. We learned, this is already by now something that we have been used to, but this is the place of Teshvu Ken Taduru, that the Pasuk says you should live, you should dwell in the Sukkah, and Teshvu, as we touched before, means living. Ken Taduru, it has to be like your life. Just like in your regular life, you have the fancy things that you bring out in your house, you set up the house beautifully and so on. You're going to be doing all of that with your sukkah, not to say that, it's a 7-day thing, it's going to be too much to schlep my fancy stuff in the sukkah. No, you have to bring it. You're switching your main primary residence to the sukkah for the 7 days of Chag HaSukkot. Mikan Amru. And from here, Chazal said, Kol Shivat Hayamim Oseh Adam Sukkato Keva. You make your sukkah your primary residence. Ve'ubeto harai. And how do you do that? Ketzat, hayulo kelim na'im. If you have nice vessels, ma'ala lesukkah, you bring in the sukkah. Masaot na'ot, you have nice linens and tablecloth and all the cushions and stuff like that, and you have nice ones, bring it to the sukkah. Ochel ve'shoteh u'mtayel, you eat, you drink, you hang out in the sukkah, and now we have in this bright time edition, umeshanen besukkah, you learn your iyun seder, your first seder of yeshiva, you bring it in the sukkah, you're learning be'iyun with all the rishonim and ahronim, you're sitting there in the sukkah and learning. Gemara says, really? You learn be'iyun in the sukkah? Ve'ha'amar Rava, we know Rava said the halacha, mikra umitna b'metalelata. Your Tanakh learning you do in the sukkah, because that's like Tanakh learning, fine. Even your Mishnah learning, the Mishnayot that people knew by heart, and you had to go over it constantly to keep it fresh and sharp, that also you do in the sukkah. But Tanuye bar mitalalata. But learning Gemara, learning Be'iyun, that needs a lot of focus. It needs, you're thinking of the Svarot, of the Mishnayot, asking questions, answering. You need a real clear mind. And sometimes you go out, the fresh air, that helps the clarity of mind. In the sukkah, maybe a little bit small, the air is not the same, the light is not the same. It's not gishmak sometimes, as gishmak as it could be outside. So that you could do, you're allowed to do outside. If you feel that you need to go outside the sukkah to learn Be'iyun, Rava says, the learning Be'iyun, you do outside the sukkah as well, if you need to. So says the Gemara, you see from here, that the in-depth learning, you don't have to be in the sukkah. So why is the Braita saying that in-depth learning should also be done in the sukkah? Lo kasha, it's not a question. Last line. Habe migras, habe iyuni. One of them, it depends. If this is your Chazara Seder, or is it your first time? If you learned something be'iyun, you went to the shiur, the Rebbe gave a shiur klali, now you're chazering it. You've learned it, you understood it, now you want to just make sure that you remember it and you get everything clear. That doesn't need a lot of brain power. You don't have to sit there, kvetch yourself to understand and to ask and to answer. You learn it, you know it. You learned it already. Then you're just doing hazara. That you have to do in the sukkah. But if you're doing it for the first time, you really need a clear mind. You need to understand, to be able to ask questions, be critical thinker, and so on. That if you feel you need to do it outside the sukkah, Hazak or Harvadia says, for instance, a person that's writing Sfarim, right, is working, and you need, you need 50 Sfarim to open, you close. You need your bookshelves, right? So you can't bring all the bookshelves, 30,000 Sfarim in the sukkah. So it's going to damage your learning and the ability of being able to properly learn. So you go into Bet Midrash, you go in your office, in your study, and that's where you learn. But if it's a regular learning, and you could do it in the sukkah, you should be doing that. Says the Gemara, Habe migras, habe iyuni. One of them is in a Chazar Seder when it's lighter and you're just reviewing, and the other one is the first time learning. Ki had Rabba, this should be Rava Rami Bar Chama. Right? These two people, the Amoraim, ki havu kaimi mikameh de Rav Chisda, when they finished the shiur with Rav Chisda, the Rebbe, Murati b'Gemara b'Hadadadi, first they would chazer quickly all of the points, the bullet point halachot that Rav Chisda said together. That was like a quick chazara. And then after they were sure that they got everything clear and they knew it well, then they would spend time on the iyun. I'll say, okay, fine, now what can we ask on this? How can we answer the questions? And which that is a deeper level of diving in. So that would be the level of iyuni. Amar Rava. Rava said, Mani mishtia b'metalalata. Your cups and drinking vessels, you could keep in the sukkah. That's not, it's not dirty, it's not disgrace for a sukkah to have it. Mani michla bar mitalata. But the food items, the pots and pans and empty, dirty plates and so on, you have to get out of the sukkah. Because just like your house, you don't keep those dirty stuff inside the house. You take them out. Here also, you don't keep them in the sukkah, you take them out. Chaspa v'shakil bar mitalata. The large bucket, the wooden bucket of water, and also the larger barrels of the klicheres of water, that also you keep outside the sukkah, because in the house also they didn't keep it inside the living area. It will be outside. It's not considered respectful to have those things inside the sukkah. And that Gemara says, well, shraga b'metalata, but the candle, the lamp, you could keep in the sukkah. Ve'amrila bar metalata, and there are those who say no, the lamp also has to be outside of the sukkah. And Gemara says that's not a machloket. Ha besukkah gedola, ha besukkah ktana. It depends if you have a sukkah that's larger or a sukkah that's smaller. The small sukkah, if you have a candle that's off, like during the day, but your lamp is there still from the night, the small sukkah is not kavod to keep it there because it's taking space and it doesn't belong there really, so you have to take it out. But if you have a massive, large sukkah and in one little corner is a lamp from last night, that is fine, is not going to be a problem. Says the Gemara, Yardu Geshamim, when the rain comes, Tara mish tisrach hamikvah. We said in the Gemara before that from the moment that your food, the sensitive items, start getting ruined, you already could pack in. So says the Gemara, Mishetisrach hamikvah shel grisim. We're talking about beans over here that are super sensitive, and you don't want any water in them. So even a little drizzling, dripping in the sukkah will be sufficient to go in.
To go out.
To go inside the house.
Oh, to go.
Yeah. So says the Gemara. Now you're already holding that this is dirat keva. The sukkah is in. The house is out. Yes, correct. But it's going inside the house. Says the Gemara. Abaye habakayativ kameh the Rav Yosef. Abaye and Rav Yosef were sitting together in the sukkah. Nashav zika v'kamaiti sibuta. A strong wind came and some stuff from the ceiling, from the schach, fell into the table. Right? It's not going to ruin the food. Right? But Rav Yosef said, okay, pack my stuff, you're going inside the house. Right? That's what he said. Amar lehu Rav Yosef, panu li mani macha. Get my stuff, gather it, take it out of the sukkah, I'm going in. So Amar le Abaye, Abaye was no shy person. He says, wait a second, Chacham, Rebbe, v'hatna mishetisrach hamikvah. The shear has to be enough water coming that ruins the food. This doesn't ruin the food. So, just deal with it. Amaleh says to me, it's correct for a regular person. I am istanis. I'm super sensitive. I am an istanis, and an istanis has its own halachot. Ledidi kevan da'anina da'atai, me because I am very sensitive. Kemisha tisrach hamikvat amili. For me, this is already sufficient level of sa'ar and discomfort that is considered like my food is getting ruined. I can't eat this. And if this is going to be the case, I can't sit in the sukkah because I can't. This is not the way I live. I'm a very highly sensitive individual, and that would be for me equivalent and tantamount to tisrach hamikvah, and therefore I should go in.
It's interesting because Rabbi Yosef is blind. So yes, he was still so sensitive to.
Well, this does not necessarily mean that this was before or after he became blind. He was not born blind. No. Remember that Rabbi Yossi and his peer Rav Sheshes, they were the Talmidim of Rav, and when Rav passed away, they made this upon themselves to keep the Shmirat Inayim of Rav. And once they were not successful, they became blind. It was a self-imposed thing that they had, not necessarily something that they were born with. So it is maybe before, but even if it's after, if it's something that he notices that there are particles of schach inside his food, and it's something that he can't deal with, even though for other regular people this would not be considered ruined, but he was highly sensitive and it was considered something he would not be dealing with. And the next piece of the Gemara is a fascinating topic of whether or not you have to go back in the sukkah after the rain. So it rains, you have like a little shower for 20 minutes, you take your stuff out of the sukkah, you set up in the house, and as you're ready to start the food, you see that it stopped raining. So you have to schlep back in, or you go back to sleep, and as you warm and cozy yourself up, you realize that the rain has finished. You have to schlep back your bed and everything else to the sukkah, which is going to be the next topic that we're going to discuss, B'ezrat Hashem, in the next shiur. Hazaku Baruch.